Hey guys, it's Libby. How are you? Today I wanted to film what I guess technically is my reaction to the Women's Prize long list, although I will only be talking about one of the books and I will not be talking about the fact that it has been longlisted for the Women's Prize. The book is Kelleigh Greenberg-Jephcott's Swan Song, which is about Truman Capote and the relationship he had with a bunch of socialite women in the 1970s who he became friends with, and they sort of confided various secrets in him, and then he published a fiction work which was not sufficiently fictionalized to disguise who they were, and they got really upset about it. Sorry if I have the details of the plot not exactly correct, because that's not really what this video is about. My first reaction when I learned about this book, and this was also the initial reaction of David when I read him the long list, was, you can write fiction about Truman Capote? I mean, he died in the 1980s. That's not that long ago. There's people alive right now who knew him, and for whom it would be weird to read about him in a novel. And this of course reminded me of the video I did on Mrs. Poe, which is a fictionalized story of Edgar Allan Poe and his maybe mistress. And I talked about how I was intensely uncomfortable with reading nonfiction, or with reading fiction about this actual historical figure, and how it was like I was uncomfortable with the intimacy that was in the text, and I didn't really feel it was appropriate. And in that video I said, no historical fiction about real people. But then I got to thinking, okay, on my shelves I have The First Man in Rome, which is about Marius and Sulla, who are actual figures in the late Roman Republic. And I've got the Autobiography of Henry VIII with notes by his fool Will Sommers, which, though it says autobiography in the title, is in fact a work of fiction. And I was like, okay, I'm fine reading about Henry VIII and Marius and Sulla, but not Truman Capote or Edgar Allan Poe. So what's the distinction here? And I was trying to come up with a cutoff point in history where someone lived sufficiently far back enough in time that it would not be weird to read fiction about them. So I started thinking of other historical figures. The first one I thought of, you'll be so surprised to learn, is Shakespeare. I would not be okay reading fiction about Shakespeare. Just don't bring it up to me. Also, how are you gonna write fiction about Shakespeare? We know like nothing about him. But Henry VIII is okay. And he was just like a couple of generations before Shakespeare. So I tried to refine this, and I just used English monarchs as my metric. So I decided Henry VIII, totally fine to read about. James I, who was the king at the beginning of the 17th century, not fine. I don't want to read a fictional story about James I. And then in between, you've got Henry's three children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. And I feel lightly squiffy, I would say, about reading fiction about them. Like, I would want to have a good deal of confidence in the author, and going into the book, I would prepare myself to DNF it if it felt weird to me. So somewhere in the second half of the 16th century, it stops being okay to write about historical figures in fictional contexts, according to my metrics. And I was curious if any of you guys had opinions, if you're like, there's a specific date where, you know, beyond which one must not write, if you judge by like how famous a person is, or how like personally attached you are to a certain person. Sorry for all the noise going on outside. There's a protest going on in Dom Square. So once I had my distinct cutoff point of late 16th century, I realized that there are some exceptions to this. So this cutoff point for historical figures only applies if they are the main or a significant character in the work. I'm okay with like a cameo from an actual historical figure. Although I would just suggest to authors that you not use them, or that there should be a really good reason for you to use them, because I've never read a cameo of a historical figure in a work of fiction and been like, oh wow, that was really great. That really like upped this story for me. I'm always just like, that was fine. And I'm also comfortable with writing about real people who actually lived in history but who are not well known at all. So if you find like an actual letter that someone wrote in 1761 and the only record we have of this person is this letter, and you want to like use this letter to spin off a whole story, I'm fine with that. Or if someone was like a very minor politician or something, I'd be okay reading fiction about them just because like I don't have any other information about them, and I'm probably not going to acquire any more information about them in the history of my life that would like come into conflict with this fictional story. So to me, even if I intellectually know that they're real, I'm still just treating them like a fictional character who only exists in this narrative. So those are my rules. Thoughts. I think those is more accurately my thoughts on fiction about real people. I am desperately curious to know what other people think, so leave a comment, make a video, write a blog post, and tell me all about it. I look forward to hearing from you. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add. I am totally fine watching films about people who have died recently. Like, I'll watch a movie about Winston Churchill. I don't know why watching a movie is okay and reading a book is not. I guess maybe, like, there's a greater possibility for intimacy, which I don't want to have with, like, recent historical figures in books than in films. Yeah, those are my thoughts.